Good evening, members and friends of Dartmouth College. Welcome, everyone. My name is Zinovia Toloudi, and I'm Associate Professor of Architecture here at Studio Art. On behalf of our department, I have the pleasure of introducing architect and artist Sotirios Kotoulas, our artist in residence for this winter term. I'm particularly excited with Sotirios' residency, as his work has been dedicated at the intersection of art and architecture, as many of us here at Studio Art. A few years ago, during a cold and snowy winter, I had the chance to visiting one of his artistical/architectural projects, the Red River Stonehouse in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The experience inside out between the art and architecture, playing with both the functional and the formal elements, was splendid. I recommend the visit if you can. Recently, I was impressed with his latest, in quotes, anti-structures or permanent sculptural architectures, if I may, in Deste Foundation Center for Contemporary Art in Greece. I'm curious on what he's going to share with us tonight and throughout the term. Few words about Sotirios. Sotirios received his professional degree in architecture at the Irving Sanin School of Architecture of the Cooper Union in New York. For those who know, Cooper Union was just for the super talented, and it was free for those who were attended back in the days. He received his Master of Architecture studying History and Theory of Architecture with Alberto Perez Gomez at McGill University in Montreal. His book, Space Out, edited by Lebbeus Woods and published by the Research Institute for Experimental Architecture, explores the spatial and material dimension of invisible and immeasurable electromagnetic phenomena. Sotirios has worked on several urban design and architecture projects in Israel, USA, China, and Dubai. He was the recipient of the Abraham E. Kazan Award for Urban Design Studies in New York City. While continuing work in New York and Europe, Sotirios also manages and supervises specialized masonry construction projects in Canada and executes national certified masonry building technology research and development on old and new buildings. He recently supervised the masonry construction for Alpha Masonry at the hydroelectric dam in northern Canada and the restoration of Lower Fort Garry, a national heritage site built in 1812. Sotirios was a research consultant at the Cooper Union Institute for Sustainable Design in New York City for the Lessons from Modernism exhibition that studied sustainable details and concepts in early modern architecture. A book was published for this exhibition, and the exhibition traveled to the Elmhurst Museum in Chicago. Sotirios was visiting professor at the University of Puerto Rico and the Polytechnic University of Puerto Rico, where he taught graduate and undergraduate design, urban architecture, and a graduate history and theory of architectural seminar. He taught a joint graduate design studio with Nader Tehrani and Jose Javier Toro at the University of Puerto Rico in San Juan and at MIT in Boston. He currently teaches a range of courses, including studio and history and theory seminars at the University of Manitoba School of Architecture. He serves on the board of directors at the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. He is president of Plug-in Institute of Contemporary Art, and he is the board chair of Basilica Hudson in Hudson, New York. Sotirios also serves on the Anthology Film Archives board in New York City. He has designed artist studios for Garth Weiser and Francesca Di Matteo in upstate New York and executed exhibition design for Garth Weiser paintings 2008 to 2017 at the Contemporary Austin. Currently, he's designing a house for artist Max Snow on the Snake River in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and a house for painter Catherine Bernhardt in Old San Juan, Puerto Rico. Sotirios is renovating an existing structure on an 84-acre property near Ojai, California for Kyle DeWoody. He was also the project manager for the restoration of Donald Judd's architecture office building for the Judd Foundation in Marfa, Texas. Most notably, Sotirios designed a 71-unit masonry rental apartment building in downtown Winnipeg and was in charge of construction administration for the project. The apartment building is 30% more efficient than the best case under the new National Energy Code for Canada. Currently, Sotirios and engineer John Wells are researching the dynamic thermal resistance of the building. Dear everyone, please join me in welcoming Sotirios with a warm applause. Sotiri, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening. It's a pleasure and honor to be here tonight. I would like to thank Jerry Otten, director, Professor Zenovia Touloudi. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Co-chairs Tricia Tracy and Jay Hall, and President Philip Hanlon, and the faculty at the Black Family Visual Arts Center here at Dartmouth College. I also want to thank the William B. Jaffe Memorial Fund and the Matthew Wysocki Memorial Fund for their generous support of my residency and the exhibition. With that, we'll plunge right into the first project, which is titled Star Stories. It was a project for the Venice Biennale last year in the Italian Pavilion that was curated by Alessandro Melis. And the exhibition was titled Conceiving the Plan, Nuance and Intimacy in Civic Space. And it was curated by Yael Hamiri Sanso. The exhibition included 12 architects, and the exhibition was built to honor the legacy and teachings of the late architect Diane Lewis, who was a teacher of mine, a mentor, and a friend. A book came out called Conceiving the Plan, Nuance and Intimacy in Civic Space, which will be in the exhibition room. But it is out. It came out a few months ago, and it includes essays by Barry Bergdahl, Daniel Shearer, an interview with Fran Lebowitz, an interview with Dan Graham, the late Dan Graham. And I wanted to read an excerpt, Auguration, from Diane Lewis to get us into her space, to understand the ground that we were all operating in as we proposed our own projects and worked through our own work. The art of drawing the city at an architectural scale has been an important and potentially unique aspect of the studios that I have conducted since 1982, with the impressive range of colleagues from this faculty and from all facets of the architectural world that have assembled at Cooper Union. It is essential to excellent studio work that students are asked to search, to propose, and formulate the name for a civic institution that they aspire to realize in order to develop a vision for their future practice. The special design aptitude that the student of Cooper Union hold is empowered through the art of confronting form with a committed and inspired vision for civic activity. These studios introduce the discomfort necessary to enter an understanding of critical practice. Biting the apple, the architect must confront the autonomy between form and program. The students have the foundation of architectonics, which strengthens their ability to conceive typological innovations in structure and conditions of refined spatial identity. The richness of the city is introduced as a field of thought. To confront their tectonic tools with the necessity to imagine a qualified condition of inhabitation. The exploration of great civic architecture requires an autonomous architectural formulation within the lexicon of architecture that must also carry a profound vision for its current program, as well as a potential to house future unknown programs. Star Stories is a project that proposes an architectural nucleus for Indigenous culture and a National Council for Reconciliation in Winnipeg, a Treaty 1 territory. The selected site is a ceremonial place of governance, justice, education, and culture that intentionally omitted Indigenous culture, myth, philosophy, and ritual. The new emancipatory humanitarian program is a place of reconciliation and healing, a place where structural systems are decolonized and the treaties are honored. This significant location influences and speaks to power, systems of justice, education, and art. The site is charged with addressing the thickness of history and the memory of what occurred. The fluctuating energies and motions of phenomena related to the stars, sun, and water form new relationships between celestial and terrestrial bodies, as a new celestial image informs a new order. This is not a prescriptive, programmatic proposal, but one that is driven by phenomena and energy on a mythopoetic stage. Winnipeg is a charged city on a level, flat plain with expansive space, extreme conditions, vivid light, and hallucinatory phenomena. The city's ground was the bed of an inland sea called Lake Agassiz, created by the melting of the last glacial age. The heartland of Turtle Island is a sacred meeting place for Indigenous peoples, where the north-flowing Red River and the east-flowing Assiniboine River meet. The energy here is high, and for thousands of years, this place initiates storytelling, invites mourning, and incites vivid dreams. And here we see the confluence of the two rivers, which was a sacred meeting place for Indigenous cultures throughout Turtle Island. The electromagnetic tonalities are present. The encompassing phenomena, light, aurora, are acute and arresting. In this project, light is my primary material as I project and impress the luminous energy of stars into matter, into glass. Mediated energy animates matter. The star maps of the summer and winter solstice are scaled to the physical limits of the site. Vertical lines connect the stars between the solstice planes and mark the Earth's cyclical motion over time. Sections cut throughout reveal spaces in various durations of time, which is what we see in these slides. Each point marks 6 hours of star motion. Short vectors mark 2 days of star motion, and long vectors mark 30 days of star motion. The new celestial image is an order that activates the ground. As the Indigenous philosopher Leroy Little Bear tells us, in Aboriginal philosophy, existence consists of energy. All things are animate, imbued with spirit, and in constant motion. In this realm of energy and spirit, interrelationships between all entities are of paramount importance. And space is a more important referent than time. For the Anishinaabe people, the interpretation of the stars reveals stories about the land. The human body is made of star materials, and stars embody stories of the spirits. The latent myths reveal truths, and truth is cumulative. The cosmic plans that are drawn are not an attempt to construct an objective truth. Nothing is objective, because objectivity is constructed from nowhere. These celestial plans are culturally and geographically located and rooted. Night sky is a mirror of terrestrial mortal life. It retains stories. Stories are imagined and constructed by viewing the stars. There's a symbiotic relationship between stars and humans. Humans project meaning up to the stars, and the stars project stories back to us. For instance, the Big Dipper, there are 7 hunters hunting the bear in the summer, but in the winter, as the stars reorient themselves in the sky, the winter bear is hibernating, laying down. This is the celestial site plan. So as I cut sections through this construction, as we saw through the previous slides, a hole appeared in the center. So that was one thing that popped out at me. And of course, sections really reveal what's there, and you probably hear the line that sections never lie, which is why your teachers may ask you to cut sections and sections and sections through your architectural work. In this situation, this hole in the center led me to the stories of Bagone Gijik, which is the Anishinaabe word for hole in the sky. which in Anishinaabe means the original people who were lowered. The late elder and knowledge keeper Dave Cruchen shared his stories with me. The stories he tells are his, and they're not for me to tell. I'm grateful and thankful to have received this inspiring knowledge over time and over working through this project. And some of these stories can now be found in the book Wabanong, The Resurgence of a People, Clearing the Path for Our Survival, which is out there. So the hole in the sky, this oculus discovered in section, becomes the central myth of the project. How this oculus or hole in the sky materializes and translates from pure geometry to materiality, a materiality that projects back into the space of the senses. Treaty 1 was signed on August 3rd, 1871. 10 treaties were signed across Canada. This is the first one. Winnipeg is located in Treaty 1 territory. And the Lower Fort Garry that Zenobia mentioned was instrumental as a place for the signing of this treaty. The treaties have not been honored, so that is a huge crisis, a social crisis that we have the responsibility to ensure that the treaties are honored. So this drawing maps the solar geometries on August 3rd, 1871. The solar altitude and the azimuth are drawn on the site, as one can see in the round, to understand the solar geometry of the place as I enter this site. Canada was originally built on a triangulated non-monolithic foundation of Indigenous nations and Francophone and Anglophone settlers. The arrival of Europeans on Treaty 1 territory, the French first, followed by the British, unleashed the brutal forces of modern colonization and genocide. The complex Canadian principles of egalitarianism, multiculturalism, and inclusivity have developed alongside their exposure to Indigenous culture. John Ralston Saul, in his book The Comeback from 2014, says, "The ease with which Canada embraces diversity today has been made possible by our non-monolithic foundation. And that foundation worked to the extent it did largely because of the more complex ideas of belonging and identity in Indigenous societies. What we call multiculturalism or interculturalism is constructed and works because it is constructed on those ideas. Without that underlying complexity, we would have found ourselves in the European nightmare, the delusional myth of one blood, one race, one people. And so, if you undermine the complexity of our foundation, you undermine diversity as a Canadian model. The Crown is the people. The people are the guarantors of the state. The Governor General, who represents the Crown in Canada, is the protector of the Crown, that is, of the people. It is about a role above power, a concept of the state above interests. That's something we'll discuss a little bit more. But these treaties were signed with the Crown, not with politicians, which, on the one hand, is good because the Crown is a long duration. It's always there. It doesn't. It's not limited to the life cycle of a political life, which is short. And so, if the Crown is us, the people, then we are responsible for these treaties. So we are accountable to them, and so it is our responsibility. So as architects, when we approach this ground and we approach this place, my question was, how do I approach it? Knowing that this land is loaded with this mythology and meaning, how do I, as a non-Indigenous individual, as a Greek immigrant child, a child from Greek immigrants, approach this place and the meaning in this place and the mythology of this place? How do architecture, embodied phenomena, and memory create the conditions for the decolonization of urban fabric? Is a question that I keep, asking myself. And so what we see here is that this is the Manitoba Legislative Building. The site is anchored by that. And in Winnipeg, the British reoriented the main French east-west Broadway axis, which is here. This was the main axis. They built a train station to block it, so you couldn't go to the French side of the city. And they reoriented, created a new axis that's north-south. And there's a whole series of programs. The selected site is a ceremonial place of governance, justice, education, and culture that intentionally omitted Indigenous culture, myth, philosophy, and ritual. The programs along this axis are distributed across a lever. On the south end, the legislative building houses the seat of the democratic government and power, rooted in ancient alchemical, hermetic, and Renaissance white magic, Freemasonic orders, and Greek and Egyptian mythology. The axial fulcrum, which is somewhere here, is weighed by programs of law, justice, and incarceration, which are all these buildings here. At the northern end, a series of cultural and education institutions inform, temper, and balance democratic governance, justice, and power. The National Council for Reconciliation is the new fulcrum, reorienting, balancing, and harmonizing this programmatic matrix. Currently within this space, Western historical orders and monuments dominate. So the question is, how do we readjust? How do we transform this axis that has omitted the founding peoples of this place? So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was led by Senator Murray Sinclair from 2008 to 2015, and 94 calls to action were developed. You can look into this at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, which is online. Issues such as Canadian government's UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Royal Proclamation and Covenant of Reconciliation, settlement agreement parties in the United Nations, equity for Aboriginal people in the legal system, National Council for Reconciliation, professional development and training for public services, church apologies and reconciliation, education for reconciliation, youth programs, museums and archives, missing children and burial information, National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, Media and Reconciliation, Sports and Reconciliation, Newcomers to Canada, etc. So it's an incredible commission that came together that recorded stories from survivors of residential schools and other oppressive acts of cultural genocide. This is the monument gaze plan. This drawing shows the direction of each monument's gaze on site. So I started to look at every monument that was around the site, from Jacques Cartier, who looks east, it's over here, towards New France, to the Holocaust Memorial. Nellie McClung and the women's suffrage movement that she led pierces right through the center of the rotunda and the legislative rotunda. The Holocaust Memorial, there's a cenotaph, there are World War I, World War II memorials, etc. And the apex is Louis Riel, who's the founder of Manitoba, who is of Métis origin, who created the first province east of Ontario through an armed uprising. So this drawing it also looks into the pool of the Black Star, which is inside the legislative building, which is an 8-pointed star which forms the axial base for Hermes Trismegistus. And Hermes Trismegistus is a gold 16-foot statue that is known as the Golden Boy, that is on top of this building, that I had the opportunity to restore too when I was in the early aughts. My father was restoring the building. So I know a lot about its inner workings because I spent a lot of times in its walls and in its all sorts of nooks and crannies in the dome, within the dome, et cetera. And so there's an entire alchemical project in this building. So that was very exciting for me to look into. Hermes Trismegistus is flanked by figures of earth, air, fire, and water, which is the materia prima, and the altar of the Black Star is modeled after a 5th century temple of Persephone, or the Tholos and Epidavros. And here, this is where this is the text of the site that I was mining. So there's an embedded syntax of the Manitoba Legislative Building, which orients the site. So I was looking at, the references that this building makes. So overlaid to scale the plan of Didima, the Temple of Apollo, in which it forms the outline of the Manitoba Legislative Building Plan, and its forest of columns and spaces for oracles precisely form the limits of the legislative center. The body of the Pantheon aligns with the width of the legislative building. So I was really looking at them as bodies and programs. The Athenian Agora, the Stoa of Attalus is the same length as the Hudson Bay Company store, which is on this axis, which became the main kind of department store in the city. The Campidoglio, also to scale here on the bottom right corner and here. So you see how they all relate, and there's caryatids inside the legislative building. So if I align the caryatids, the Erechtheion with the legislative building, how does the Acropolis fit, and where is the entrance and the propylaea, and how does that transform the way we think about the site? So there's a whole hermetic alchemical project here that is projecting onto the site. So the question is, when you intervene the site with this new program, how do you speak to that? You know, that is also latent mythologies and stories and meaning, and whatever you project onto the site. What is the gesture? How do you communicate to this new this whole assemblage of programs? So the hermetic power of the site is clarified by Francis Yates and Giordano Bruno and the hermetic condition. Between the soul of the world and its body, there is a spiritus mundi which is infused throughout the universe and through which the stellar influences come down to man, who drinks them in through his own spirit and the whole corpus mundi. The magician was one who knew how to enter into this system and use it by knowing the links of the chains of influences descending vertically from above and establishing for himself a chain of ascending links by correct use of the occult sympathies in terrestrial things, of celestial images, of invocations of names and the like. This is the Hudson Bay Company. It's a department store that anchors the northern edge of the site. HBC was a British fur trading company that played a key role in the colonization of Canada. The massive floor plates and windows will be removed. The south brick party wall will be dismantled, and the 3 stone facades will be fortified and to stand as a ruin. Over time, new structural systems will be introduced to support new spaces and programs. The adjacent parking lot will be raised to make space for genocide memorial. So, and that's kind of the opening up, and this fantasy, this image of a new ordering system that comes from the stellar cosmologic geometries. And these are more images, historical images of the site, which is this area, which had university programs and whatnot. Those have since been demolished, and it's a park. There's the cultural programs like the Winnipeg Art Gallery, the Cenotaph, the archive building, clinic. Every building has this local stone. And then this new Michael Maltson Inuit Art Center, which is part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, about centering space for Inuit art, right in the center of the city. So my site is right here, and my father built this, and I had the opportunity to work on it a little bit too. And these are different proposals for this mall or axis. And these are sketches. This is an idea of what the sections might look like in this space of celestial orders, and how the site flooded with water. The site becomes a reflective body for the stars at night. Water, of course, is a primary material and a source of healing. And this figure I think of as an urban block. So for me, the red line was, it's not for me to determine what programs belong to a National Center for Reconciliation. That's not I cannot prescribe that. That is not That is a red line. I do not cross that. But this would be led by the Indigenous peoples, and they would determine what programs are necessary for this space and what their form is. And so the idea was that it exists right now as a solid plinth of the local bedrock, the Tyndall stone that is there, and that over time, as programs are introduced, it would be quote unquote carved. So the idea is that I propose a gesture, that it's coming out of the water, and that it is, if you're coming out of the legislative building, it establishes a new horizon, and it is a gesture for reconciliation. This new emancipatory humanitarian program is a place of reconciliation and healing, a place where structural systems are decolonized and treaties are honored. This is an urban block to be carved and articulated over time. The architect clears a space for communication, for citizens of Treaty 1 to discuss, debate, and reach consensus on what programs are necessary for reconciliation, the programs and institutions that heal and harmonize. And here's another image from the other angle of this body coming out. So, the question of how the cosmologic phenomena start to carve into the space, and how that's the next stage for this project, and that would be collaborative, of course, with knowledge keepers. And here's an image of the celestial bodies for the Anishinaabe people. And then I'm going to jump into Space Out, which is a book that came out in 2005, and some of the drawings are in the exhibition, as it was edited by Lebbeus Woods and published by Springer Verlag in Vienna and the Research Institute for Experimental Architecture. This book records the process of fabricating an architecture derived from what we cannot see. Through scale, a hallucination distinguishes the immeasurable, homogeneous landscape above the Arctic Circle. Invisible electromagnetic phenomena confront the limits of the body to establish a scalar threshold with the celestial. This is not an inhabitable, site-specific architecture. Rather, it is translatable, existing outside the realm of building as an architecture about architecture. So it starts as a whiteout, and I imagine, walking through this landscape. This is an image of Inuit people in the landscape, and there's this homogeneous white space is starting to construct. It's starting to formulate this whiteout, and so the question is, in the presence of a whiteout, in the presence of immeasurable space, how can we position ourselves and orient ourselves as a body? And so I started to look at invisible phenomena, like electromagnetic phenomena, which is very active up there because of the magnetic north poles, to start to think about, how can I map this? How can I understand this? How can I conceptualize this? And how could this become a form of measure, a way to allow the body to exist in this space in some sort of measure, so that you're not eternally, in a sense, lost and ungrounded. And this is an image of a sunspot. So, electromagnetic forces, radiation basically gets emitted by the sun and kind of storms through the solar system. And our magnetosphere is what basically protects us. And that's what keeps most of this energy from coming into our atmosphere, which would literally just singe all electronics. Where it does slip in is in the two poles, the north and the south magnetic north poles. That's where it comes in. So it is visible in northern latitudes, and I've experienced it many times growing up. So it's always been a mystery and a fantasy for me to get into its structure and how it works, and to give it a language, to really think about the primary experience of phenomena and how that primary experience is what has created language. You know, first time you saw lightning, you know, what is the word that came out that embodies that experience, right? So I was very interested in constructing a language that you know, starts to articulate this phenomena that we cannot see as a way to enter this space. I'll read a little bit of Lebbeus Woods' introduction to this work. He said, "It is rare to encounter basic research in the field of architecture, but this publication of this project by Sotirios Kotoulas gives us a chance to do so. By its nature, basic research opens up new and unfamiliar domains that address the foundations of our knowledge. Architects, absorbed as they are in contemporary problems of design, devote little time to questioning the assumptions underlying their work. What is space? How do we know it? What constitutes its reality, its physical fabric? What material forces lying beyond the realm of the visual shape the physicality of space and human comprehension of it? Our world is greatly impacted by the invisible and most extensively by the focus of Kotoulas' research, electromagnetic forces. Computers and the internet, satellites and cell phones, indeed all of the electronic instrumentation of our globally interconnected civilization, increasingly relies upon, for cohesion, engage the range of the electromagnetic spectrum of which visible light is but a sliver. In a palpable sense, we already inhabit electromagnetic spaces and are part of their constituency, as the term cyberspace attempts to acknowledge. The reason we do not know where cyberspace is or when we are in it or how it looks and feels when we are is because our conceptual and perceptual faculties are stuck in older ideas of space. We are hemmed in by our present assumptions and by our ability to visualize and thus physically experience space we cannot measure by means we already know. Kotoulas aims to change this by bringing the invisible into the realm of the visible. Without losing his sense of awe or reducing the immeasurable, he accomplishes his mission by traveling to polar regions of the far north, to the geographical edges, if not the metaphysical limits of our present civilization, where the visual dimension of our experience is distorted by extreme conditions. He recognizes this as a chance to not only extend our knowledge of ourselves and what we can create, but to add something new to the apparatus of our understanding. His is a polar expedition to the mind and the territories, philosophical material. His rigorous and imaginative explorations reveal or claimed by him, quite appropriately, in the name of architecture. It's sort of the best written thing, so on my work, so I can't, you know, it's better than me talking about it, but it's so clear. You know, what I discovered as I researched more, you know, electromagnetic frequencies and energy was the effect of mild electric currents on our body. Mild electric currents can induce hallucinations. So that, for me, was the entry point for a new way of conceptualizing and thinking about space, which was, you know, if you're in this whiteout and there are all these electromagnetic charges, you may hallucinate, and that hallucination, audible, the sound you hear that's not there, the thing you see that's not really there, becomes a form of measure, becomes a way for you to engage with an otherwise vacuous space. You know, when they say nature abhors a vacuum, it's because vacuums are a pure abstraction. They don't exist, you know. But the experience of the immeasurable is something we can experience in certain places. So for me, that was the Arctic. And so these drawings, this is a map that starts to map over the circumpolar region where I started to pull and extract data from 1 second to construct different maps. And these maps would be used by the navigator in the Arctic. I was very interested in people like Dr. Franz Mesmer, which is, you know, where he said there exists a mutual influence between the heavenly bodies, the earth, inanimate bodies, the phenomena of electricity and magnetism. Obviously, mesmerism comes from there, but he was already clued into this relationship. And there's a doctor, Dr. Wilder Penfield, who in Montreal was actually opening skulls of patients with epileptic seizures applying mild electrical currents to their brain to try and induce the hallucination that these patients had before they tripped into an epileptic seizure. And he thought that that was a way to locate damaged tissue, whatever. But he applied this electricity to induce hallucinations, and he was successful in inducing hallucinations. So the patients were awake, cogent, and actually describing to him what they were experiencing. So this idea that you can be in a very charged atmosphere and hallucinate, it was very interesting to me. And what is a hallucinatory drawing? What is a hallucinatory section? So I started to map the phenomena over the circumpolar region, and this is over 1 second. So I went and figured out how these instruments work. I went onto a field, and they're in XYZ. You get all this kind of data that is a little stuck in Cartesian systems. And so for me, it was, okay, how do we unleash this? This is a butterfly diagram that shows how the solar winds and how this electromagnetic energy every 11 years becomes very intense. Here is the site. And so the construction, the quote-unquote model that I made out of wood, was a way to to escape geometry, which of course is infinite, right? You can infinitely manipulate geometry. The minute geometry confronts materiality, the line becomes an edge. Now you have to negotiate, and every material has a different way of, translating that line. So for what I did was I took this 10 degrees. I started to cut these blocks of wood, and they were just rectangles. And then I started to cut the fields, the overarching angle of these fields, of the electromagnetic fields, and with very simple tools like a table saw, with multiple angles, we're able to cut away these fields out of a solid as a registration of this activity in 1 second. And so it was back and forth. The drawing fed the construction and the data that came from the construction fed back into the drawing, and there was this kind of cyclical feedback loop that went on for some time. And you can see how the geometries that are now cut into the wood massing now have a different presence because they've been projected into materiality. And so that information fed back into the drawings. And so there's this tension in the drawings. And then this is a drawing that's also in the exhibition that I did right after this project, where I wanted to figure out for a project that was off the grid, the angle of the sun and in the different times of the year, and how the roof plane of this structure would work in tandem with the sun to extract as much energy as possible. So this grid is 6 feet, which is the body, and I tried to start to think about the site with solar angles, these planes that demarcate the different azimuth and altitude of the sun, and the body's scale as the kind of first way to break into the site. These are other drawings that I made. One is in the show on glass. That is another exploration. I call them emission architecture of electromagnetic fields in space. I was also very interested at that time in Lacan and questions of the subject, and how for Lacan the image and language was how one constructs the subject, and that's how it comes into being. And for Lacan, the real was embodied by the lack, by emptiness. The pure void, in a sense, causes desire, which, always makes me think of Kahn, when he said, Louis Kahn, desire is the real motivating force for living and expression. But how do you keep that desire going? How do you keep keep the energy flowing without consummating it and killing it. So traditional tectonics, which have held architecture together until now, are no longer sufficiently explanatory. In the X-ray, walls are no longer barriers, but thresholds. Gamma waves host the neural systems of bodies, and brain waves rapidly change the scenery and scramble scale. The intersection of cosmic, terrestrial, and bodily orders orients emission architecture. New modes of orientation and language are required. The dimension of architecture goes beyond the tired subject-object dichotomy. Matter, body, and electromagnetic frequencies band together and form an interdependent environment hovering between the visible and the invisible. And then I had just thought it would be, in this context, fun to show the next step, which was the book gets published. I go to the Banff Center to a residency, and I start making work. And I meet this artist, Jeffrey Jones, who was building a 1-pixel camera. He built the circuit board and everything, and he's like, I want to go to the Arctic, and I want to test this 1-pixel camera, which takes 1 pixel of color and light. And I was like, I just finished all this stuff, and this book just came, and my publisher sent me a box from Vienna, and I was just like, super excited and whatnot, and I was like, I want to go to the Arctic too. I've never been. I've only been there in my imagination. So we decided from the Rocky Mountains to build a vessel. I had a pickup truck there, built a vessel out of plywood and various layers of insulation and waterproof things. And we went up to the Arctic, and we went in the middle of winter around the solstice and what we really wanted to experience was above the Arctic Circle, the sun doesn't rise. So you really experience twilight. And twilight is this all-encompassing light that exists for a few hours. Twilight is not a few seconds the way it is down here where we live. It's a really thickened, elongated period of time, and there are no shadows. So everything is lit up, but there's no shadow because the sun doesn't crack over the horizon. So everything kind of flattens out. It becomes a kind of flat whiteout. So I was able to experience that. We drove over rivers and insane landscapes, but he was able to test his camera. I was able to experience the landscape, and that was incredibly exciting. And then I'll go into the Red River House quickly, which is a house that I built when I first started school, and it was for my parents, which is, a lot of architects, their parents sometimes give them a chance to do a house, and it was the right time for me, right time for them, right time for me, maybe. And so I designed this house, which is built, a lot of the principles that are in Space Out, this came right before that, and I was obsessed with the whiteout again. I was really obsessed by eradicating all traces of the human body. What would it be like if you lived in a house where there was no chair, where you can really register your scale? There was no door handle that really registered that the human lives here. The TVs and the pianos and the books are all hidden, behind thick walls. The stair, everything is pushed to its most abstract. And the house is all white, kind of like the landscape there in the winter. You can also experience a full whiteout. And so this house became a really exciting project. The marble is from Greece. It's from the island of Thassos. So it's very clear. It has no veins. It's crystalline, like snow. And in the winter, it kind of reads like somebody packed all this, snow and then carved out of it this volume. There is a single axis that runs through the house, which is what we were looking this way, and all the programs come off this axis. It's nestled in a forest by the Red River, which is up here, and it has like a 20-some meter lap pool that comes off it, and you enter from a ramp in the entrance. And you can see all the swinging doors and panels, like that's where the piano is hidden, so that's a massive panel that's bolted to the concrete wall. It's all CMU, concrete block, concrete, so it's a non-combustible structure. That's the second floor. You come up the stairs, and there are the bedrooms and laundry and bathrooms. And then there's this stair that takes you to the roof. That's a hot red metal stair. And here, elevations and sections through the house. There are more photos. The furniture, these are all Donald Judd. The kitchen is John Pawson. So yeah, you can see it's just trying to hide as many things as possible. This is the main table. So it has these hinged walls that open, and then these little chairs, these little cubes come out. Planters that were custom built with wheels. But the reflections and the depth that's created is quite interesting. How the trees go all the way down, different qualities of light. That's from the second floor. The light is really spectacular in there. And then outside from the rear yard, the river floods a lot. So in the last grade flood, we had 13 feet. So we raised the house knowing that this is a serious floodplain. And the pool too, it's below ground, but it's also above ground. It stays at the same level as the house. So as the ground recedes towards the river, the pool becomes more exposed. And that's the front. There's the red stair. You see my little brother when he was little. And the rear yards. And then we'll jump into Sherbrooke Flats, which is a project that was completed in 2019. It has market and affordable rental apartments, 71 units. It's 6 stories. It's non-combustible. It's all masonry. It was a really exciting project for me to work with my father as a builder, and me doing the architecture and design, and the engineers, and the whole team, Ackman Construction. Everyone was really incredible, and these are early studies. We had to, these are early studies. I didn't know if the project could have been 14 stories, it could have been 10, it could have been 6. I wasn't really entirely sure, so I needed a variance for 14 stories. I needed density ratio, parking ratio changed, a lot, setbacks. I mean, the whole site was basically such that you couldn't do this. But it's right downtown, so it was right on the edge of downtown. High density by transit, so I had to make a case, and I had to go to the community, and I had to go to city council and get the variances. This is a drawing, this is in the show too, where I'm looking at the fins, these 5 structural load-bearing walls that that you see that keep coming up in the sketches, but basically support the building, and they act as armatures because they break through the envelope in different ways. So in some cases, they're armatures for a balcony. In other cases, they become brise-soleil. In other cases, they become a framework for a terrace and a pied-à-terre. In a terrace for the studio apartments or the 1 bedrooms. So these are, it's quite restrained. It had to work from a business perspective. So it was my first project, which had to operate, like it had to work. There's a pro forma, I had to do all that stuff because it's affordable housing as well. So, in order to build for market and affordable, you don't have a lot of room to do, jazzy stuff, but I did. And I just figured out how to keep the quality really high, and the materials really high. And so we started with looking at the neighborhood and looking at the programs and really analyzing the programmatic matrix that we were in, to really understand, everything from education, park space, healthcare, food, clinics, building heights, community centers, pharmacies, the whole bit, so we could start to figure out what are we plugging into. But the biggest thing for us was the parking variance. I had to have 1.5 parking stalls for every unit, which made no sense, because in this neighborhood, as you see in this chart, the vast majority of people do not drive to work. They use other forms of transportation. So what I did was I took the long-form census, federal census from 2011 at the time. That was the most recent one. And I made, very didactic charts that showed what's really happening in this area to affect transformation of zoning. And it's very hard and the planning department in the city of Winnipeg was incredible and very efficient, and they fully followed through, and they really liked this approach too, and it worked. For instance, there's about 15 different bus routes, so it is a transit hub, which is a perfect place for high density. We looked at household characteristics, how many renters are in the area, far more than owners. What are the age groups? What are the fields of study? Education levels, commuting time chart, shelter costs, 30% above or below income. And then we looked at, I don't know why sorry guys. And then, and so all of that information was very constructive and allowed us to completely rezone. So we got 0.3 parked cars per unit instead of 1.5, which was was the first, the lowest parking ratio for a building in the city. It is, these are the 5 load-bearing walls. They're transfer beams underground. This is the parking lot, which is the entire site. On the main floor, we have 4 commercial spaces, and the ramp below, services, lobby, and these are glazed. So when you enter, you have one visual access from the front to the back. One has become a French creperie. One is a nonprofit bike shop that also manages a lot of trails in the city. One is an art gallery, and one is Winnipeg Architecture Foundation, which is an amazing nonprofit in the city. And here we have the second floor terraces, so the building steps back, and there's these kind of enclaves on this floor. And then on the third floor, you have these cantilevered balconies that are galvanized steel, which we'll look at, and then you have the roof. The various elevations, which we've seen, and we'll see more in the photos, sections, AXO, a foundation plan with the massive piles, as you see here, that were all cast in -30 below weather, the shoring, insulation, casting piles in the winter is, and concrete is a tricky thing, but they're heated and they cure, and then they're, more piles are driven. Here you see the parking plan images. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because we're also running out of time. All the kind of underlying structure. It was really fun, running the site with our construction managers, and it was the first time I did something this large, and we finished 1 month early and $250,000 below budget. So we had $250,000 to add on some extra fun stuff at the end, which just meant coating this whole parking so that the salt doesn't destroy the concrete. That's what we blew it on. But here's the packed parking. And I think it's just important because you always see the finished projects, but it's good, as students to see the guts of a building and all the different layers. And here you start to see it rise, and the precast hollow core slabs that are craned in place, and how they're connected in various locations, whether they're an exterior masonry wall with plates and bolts, and here you start to see, as this rises, here you see all the different plates, floor plates, the masons building these walls that then get filled with rebar and concrete. They cure, and then you add the next level layer of hollow core slabs, and they're all pre-designed and constructed by Lafarge, and then they're craned on site, including stairs. And yeah, here you see the masons building these beautiful walls, and the walls had to be perfect because they're exposed. Similarly, the floor in most apartment buildings, you kind of leave the floor rough and then you glue some stuff on it or put hardwood floor or tiles. But what we decided to do was put, concrete with a lot of aggregate from a local quarry and then grind and polish the floor. So it's one 10,000 square foot floor plate that gets ground and polished on site. It takes about 2 weeks of 3 crews all day into the late night, grinding and polishing until the aggregate comes out and you got this perfect finish, and then you seal the floor, as you saw in those images before. It looks like a lot of aggregate, in the floor. The craning in of stairs, the window openings, and then there's a curtain wall system that gets installed. And this is an image, actually, this is fascinating, of all the angle irons and all the steel plates that are necessary for the masonry. And there you see the Tyndall stone, which is the stone we were discussing with Star Stories. This is 190 high with random lengths, so it weaves nicer. And the logic here is that it ties with the module of the block. So you're not, because these are layered, you have block, you have an air vapor barrier, you have 5 inches of non-combustible Roxol insulation, you have a 1-inch air gap, and you have a 90 mil stone. So that, as an assembly, is a serious thermal break, but also a thermal bank. And what we're noticing with the building is the utilities are extremely low in cost. Electrical bills of $1,000 for the whole building, Canadian, or $4,000 for natural gas for the whole building in the dead of winter is pretty amazing from a performance point of view. And electricity there is all hydro, so it's clean. Those are models, and this I really spent time with detailing because I wanted the balconies to rest on I-beams that ran through the fin, so they also acted like a lever in a sense, and the fulcrum was in the middle of the load-bearing wall, and then they were hot-dip galvanized, and then these railings were added to them. And they're kind of like baskets, and if you walk to the end, you have 2 feet at the end that extend past the load-bearing wall, and that's where you can meet your neighbor on the other side, So it's created some interesting social dynamics in the building. It's been, it's been doing very well in the sense that it's full, and there's, I don't know, a waiting list of 400 or some people. There's a big housing shortage crisis in the country, so this is definitely a project that kind of helps with rental, and all the doors are metal. All the materials are raw. So that's one thing, exposed concrete block that's raked and sealed. Doors are metal. It's like everything usually in a job site gets kind of like trashed a little because everybody knows it's gonna be clad in something. But if it's gonna be raw, you gotta treat it well. So these are sealed over and over again because I wanted the beauty of a raw metal door. I didn't want them painted. Here you see scuppers, these Tyndall stone scuppers that are huge blocks that record, and the installation of different furniture pieces and whatnot into the space. The grinding machines, the details, the onyx from Brazil, the color swatches to try and get the right pink for the terrazzo, and then the actual terrazzo flooring, which is all coved and hand coved, and this pink floor runs throughout the lobby and the adjacent commercial spaces, and that's a view at night, in the day. And these are all beautiful photos by the photographer James Britton, who's based in Montreal. There you really see the fins, and even at the end, there are these openings here with glass, but you can sit in them. They're the right height where you can jump in and sit. So sometimes you see, it's kind of like a Man Ray photo, you see like a body in the wall as you walk down the street, or somebody put a Christmas tree in there one day. So it was kind of fun to see how people use the space, and this is from the back lane. more, spare. And the onyx, details of the lobby. The gallery space with these Martin Kippenberger posters. There will be more exhibitions there. And the two official languages are English and French, but I wanted Anishinaabe. And so that's throughout the building too. And the other detail in this building is because it's a curtain wall and it's in front of the slab, I wanted when we ground the curtain wall, that the slab and the top of the floor lined up. So when you were in the space, you got this feeling of an uninterrupted space. Usually windows start up here or 2 feet up, and you have a ledge, and you feel hemmed in. You feel, that you feel the limits of the space. But this allows you to walk right onto the mullion, and you get a little bit of vertigo. So that was the design intent, and we installed these blinds that have an R value of 2, which were instrumental in the also in the energy model. And these are Mike Kelly flags, another great California artist, and kind of you see some of the spaces feel like. Parking lot, driveway. Mechanical room is all up on the roof, so it's gravity fed. This is a columbarium that I've been working on. These glass columns where I imagine, you would drop the ashes into them, and you would see them as they descend into the earth. And I'll end with Catherine Bernhardt's house, which is a really exciting project in Old San Juan, Puerto Rico, that is under construction. This is the site. It's heritage. All of Old San Juan is heritage. This exists. We have restored this, but there's nothing behind the site, and there are these 2 party walls. So Catherine Bernhardt is this incredible artist. I love her work. It's stuff like this. You've probably seen it. She's represented by David Zwirner in New York. And so we've had a lot of fun designing this house, and it's been a project that I teamed up with local architect Jose Toro, who's a dear friend of mine, and we taught studio at the University of Puerto Rico for 3 years together. And so once Catherine came to me for this project, I called him up and was like, Jose, I'd love to work with you. And he was excited about the project, and we've been working on this since. So it started with thinking about this as a tropical grotto and treating the heritage facade as a ruin that one doesn't touch. But it creates the framework and the arcade for everything that is to happen inside. And I really thought about the inside. We started to think about it as this tropical grotto with a swimming pool running down the length. It's like 30 by 55 feet or so. And then the programs up against the party wall. And that, different studies of what we could do. Obviously, we're in a heritage located site. Old San Juan is like 500-600 years old. And heritage is very strict, and so it's taken quite a few years to get approvals, and we had hurricanes in the middle and all this kind of bad stuff. But it's moving along. And this drawing is in the show. It's an early one that I did where I started to diagram, in a sense, the site. This is sort of hovers between a diagram and a partie. It's not really a diagram because it's actually true to scale and form, in a sense. But it is a kind of a laying down of different information from the site, from the adjacent site, from the sun, the grid of the body, the Spanish grid of Old San Juan, and starting to think about the scale of the house. And starting to think about, the house as a bridge and as held by 2 massive structural members on either end, one that became a receptacle for the glass windows that the whole main floor could slide into, and the other one that became a bathroom. these are some of Catherine's sketches as we were thinking about how to tile the pool. And the house starts to rise up, from this arcade. And the idea is, well, the pool has now moved up to the roof where there will be more sun and there's more room for it. But also surrounding the pool is a garden, and the fantasy is that this garden starts to grow and hang off the edge of this house, and maybe kind of take over the house too, or the inhabitant could braid the greenery or trim it and make bangs or whatever she wants to do, but that it's kind of encompassed. We found the site like that, and so there's this idea that the house can be taken over by this vegetation again. It'll be all concrete, cast in place, and a very aggregate and rough, and we'll chisel at it, so it has the appearance of a grotto in a sense. We imagine palm trees up there and all this fun stuff. And then, here's an image of the whole thing kind of taken over by vegetation, and the vegetation grows there really fast, so that could happen. These are early studies as to where the circulation would be and the different programmatic elements. And in the end, we came down with this plan. So this is the super column that is a bathroom. Your main entrance is through here. This is all a garden, and this glass slides into here and here. This is the kitchen and the a storage room. This is the second floor, so you come up this stair. We have a massive concrete wall that we have to cast because we also have earthquakes. So we have to design for hurricanes and earthquakes. And that prevents the party walls and the adjacent buildings from crashing into this house if the earthquake is that strong, or hurricane. Or that's, the theory. And then these are the bedrooms, bathrooms, and then there's a spiral staircase that takes you up to the roof with these skylights that kind of penetrate up, that are over the main stair and the pool. There's the different elevations. Sections. And there you see the spiral staircase. So you see how it really operates like a bridge, and there's a tremendous weight on the roof. And then these are all experiments with terrazzo and color, and we're having a lot of fun with Catherine on that. More studies where I just like to, basically use watercolor pencils on paper and figure out. These awnings were nixed by Heritage. The windows had to slightly move. They get pretty specific, but we're able to achieve this. And we found a cistern, so that delayed construction by about a year. It had to get excavated, and there's an archaeologist that's always on site when they do excavations, and then once they find something, they have to stop. So this process has been very slow, but we hope that we're out of the woods on that, and the form work for this house can start this year. There will be a water feature too, where you can turn on and rinse all the salt away when you come back from the beautiful beaches of Puerto Rico. And yeah, thank you. A little over time, my apologies. Questions? Yes.
Your drawings are beautiful, and I was wondering in your design process how you use drawing, hand drawing versus a computer. And you spoke about Diane Lewis in a section, and I was wondering about Edith Woods in terms of your drawing.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. So the first part of the question is how I use drawings in my design work. And then the other part was involved Lebbeus Woods and his influence. in my process. Lebbeus Woods was my thesis professor, with Anthony Vidler and Anders Abraham, and it was a whole group of really amazing people. He was a very, his intellect was profound. I mean, it was, you knew when he entered the room. He was extremely patient, and he was one of the best listeners I've ever, been around. He doesn't tell you what to do, as most profs at Cooper were known to do. They help. They listen to you and they help guide you. And I think with the Space Out project, he was very encouraging, and he'd ask me questions. He just asked me questions. The energy and the rawness of them, and I mean, his drawings of Sarajevo, of war, of his approach to anarchy and architecture. He constructed models. He constructed, I think, the thing that really, there are many things that stuck with me and that I'm influenced by, but one is he didn't, if he proposed an architecture, it was a model in the full sense, like a social model. So he thought about how this would inform, how this would play on the social plane. Architecture, I believe, is first and foremost a social science. And he felt that there was a deeper dimension to architecture that had the power to transform society, that had the power to disrupt society, had the potential to do good. So I was, incredibly inspired by him as a thinker and as an architect, but also as a teacher. And then we worked together on the book, and that was the greatest gift. He called me up one day and was like, "Hey, let's meet for coffee." And I was like, "Oh, what's?" Yeah. And that's when he was like, I really want to publish this. The publisher feels that this is kind of, there hasn't been an architect that has done this kind of research explicitly, and you should own it. I remember him saying specifically, it's you have to claim it. And I'm giving you this opportunity to build a book and to flesh it out. And I told him, oh, no, I need more time. I need to do. And he's like, no, you're going to have a lot of time to do more. You're going to focus on doing this work right now. I always hand draw with every project. Sketching, obviously, that you can do anywhere, which is and it's immediate, right? You have an idea, you're sitting at the doctor's office or on an airplane or in a lecture, and there's a boring lecturer, and you're like sketching away. So that is immediate, and I love sketching, and I think in the sketch, and Diane was very good at this, reading tomes into a mark, and how that mark sits on the page, and what you decided to trace from the urban city plan or an architectural plan. What did you lift off? What did you, what was exciting about it, and what does that mean when you drop it in this location, or when you intervene or rescale it and position it somewhere else? So my first professor was Raymond Abraham there, who was also, taught. That's where we learned. That's where it all started. That was our architectonics here, and the power of drawing, and Raymond wanted us to study painting, and so we had a painter. Her name was Joan Waltemuth, who came and lectured us on painting, and then she'd take us to Anthology Film Archives, and we would watch Robert Smithson's The Spiral Jetty. I think it was the first film we watched in the first month of architecture school. That and Michael Snow's Wavelength, and that's where we really understood concept, and so it was drawing for me is, hand drawing is slow. It has a fixed scale or fixed scales. You're not zooming in and out and, like computer. You can really figure out proportions and fixed relations within other bodies, whether they're architectural or figures on the site or trees, whatever they are. It allows you to do that in a very thoughtful way, and it's slow. And I know in our culture, slow sucks because it's all about the immediacy. It's like people get fed up because things have to be fast and whatever. And it's like slow cooking. So, drawing is so beautiful, hand drawing, because it is just slow and it allows you to meditate, and you really start to spend time and think about the line weight and the different line weights. They're not programmable. They're, you have to push that pencil to make it. You have to think about the paper. The paper becomes your site. So to me, I always start with hand drawing, and I employ hand drawing wherever I need to and up to the point that I need. And so you'll see in the vellum drawings in the show, they're all studies. They're all unfinished. You can pick one up and keep drawing on it. And I've done that. Sometimes I pick a drawing off the shelf a year later because another issue has come up that I have to articulate, and I delve back in it, and it becomes the site for a detail or whatnot. I use the computer to do other forms of drawing, like an apartment layout. I'm not going to do by hand. That's the beauty of CAD. You can move a couch around and the toilet, and because you're figuring things out, you don't need to do that on vellum or paper and a pencil and erase it a million times. I see that as a waste of time. So there is a space for all of these technologies, and there's a place for these tools. They're all tools. And to me, my best ideas come by hand. I never really discover much on the computer, to be honest. I have to know what I want to program into the computer. It's rare that I figure out an elevation on the computer or something. Like it's already like on a drawing, and then I'll take that information into the computer and start to finesse it for construction purposes or whatnot. But otherwise, it could sit on paper and kind of live there. Yes.
So first of all, thank you very much for this lecture. I was struck by your presentation of your very first project, even the manner of presentation, the way you went into learn about some of the drawings, charting sun patterns and what have you. For me, the very presentation of it, the way you presented it, the word that came to my mind was mystic. The way that you try to internalize the worldviews of the indigenous of Winnipeg. And you use phrases like mythopoeia, which I found very interesting. I think of that in a J.R.R. Tolkien context. And so where I'm going with this is, I know you studied with Alberto Perez Gomez, and known for his phenomenological approach to architecture. So could you talk about how, speaking of influence, could you talk about how his influence on you manifests itself in your approach to that project?
Good question. So I studied with Alberto Perez Gomez. How did his influence coming from a phenomenological space influence the way I approach my work, and in particular the Star Stories project? Greatly. Alberto is a gem of a person, an incredible heart, incredible mind. It was such an incredible 2 years to study with him. both theory and history, and the phenomenological orientation, philosophical orientation, was core at Cooper Union. John Haydick, I mean, when I first started studying, John Haydick was there, and then he died kind of halfway through. But the, phenomenology was key to the way the studios were constructed, our philosophical orientation. And when I studied with Alberto, the historic arc all crystallized to me. It was the first time that all of these amazing tidbits that we had studied and visited and all were strung together in this long, massive arc of, 2 years of in-depth studying from the medieval to, Le Corbusier. And not only architectural works and treatises but also philosophy and theory, and that was rooted in the phenomenological project, the German and the French especially. The primary thing is your primary source. Learning how to read a primary source, respecting the intentionality of the author and the architect, respecting the intentionality of a culture, of a people, listening to them, not constant, is a symptom of bad architectural education is you project onto everything because everything's meaningless and it's all a tabula rasa and you can do whatever you want, That was like abhorred, both at Cooper Union and with Alberto. There was tremendous respect for the author and for cultural intentionality. So that runs constant. That's a base that you start from, and then it's firsthand experience and the value and the primacy, the importance of being able to expose yourself and open yourself up to the point that you can understand that experience. That you just don't run through it while you're thinking of something else. But like, how do you slow time down? How do you thicken the present, as Alberto likes to say many times, to understand in a full, bodily, corporal way, what you are surrounded by, and how that makes you feel, how that makes you think, how that makes you, and really being, as another term, attuned to the environment. Attunement is actually a great book if you're interested in how do we harmonize with our surroundings? How do we harmonize with our environment, with other people, on the social dimension, in the natural dimension, right, in small in nature. So those were all things that I picked up and learned from these great thinkers and teachers. And I, in the mythic dimension, myth is a way to understand truth. And in our mythology is truth, and is a way of constructing truth. Cities have latent forces, latent memories. Diane used to call it the unconscious or the subconscious of the city. And we really learn how to mine the city for this meaning. What happened here? And how could you, as an architect, then, take an event, take an experience, whether it was last year or 100 years ago or whatever, and bring that back to the surface and bring it to, like in the case of Star Stories, that's a prime example of, an erasure. And that was the full intention of the English and the French, was like, and goodbye. We have colonized this place, this is ours. And, the term terra nullius, nobody's land, is what allowed all these, European cultures to come and conquest land. So, the English built fences and planted shrubs and claimed that was theirs. And, The French did elaborate, New France, they did elaborate. They would dress indigenous people in clothes and bring it across and sing these songs, and everybody had a special thing. It was a whole theatrical thing. And after that performance and performative act, land was theirs. According to them, the Portuguese drew the stars. If you mapped the stars, land was yours. Brazil, boom, and those were all understood. The Spanish were just slaughtered everyone. They didn't have much time for. They basically came in, read an edict, and bye-bye, you're gone. But those forms of colonization, those methods were all understood by those different colonizing empires, and they were acceptable, and they were the way that the English could say to the French, well, it is mine because I built a fence, and the French would be like, oh yeah, that's true, I sang a song here, and it's mine, and so on and so forth. So, there's a low, in Canada, we are, undergoing a huge reconciliatory project as a society, and really looking at, okay, what is in these treaties? How have they not been honored? What is our responsibility to them as citizens and to the founding peoples? How does their story come into the foreground again? And it must always be led by Indigenous people. But as treaty citizens, we also have a responsibility. You can't just sit back and say, well, wait for, it's like, no, how do you engage with this story and these people, the mythologies of these people and the meaning of this place? And so it's always it's very sensitive. And at what point, where do you design till? Those are all, I think, nuances that I do have to thank my mentors and teachers for helping guide us through how to approach a place that is not yours. Same with storytelling. It's just, there are certain stories that are very specific to very specific elders who, dreamt them or had a vision, and they're not for me to tell. I don't come in here and say this. So those are written, and I think it's, again, respect for the author and respect for the author's intention and how the culture treats these stories and the significance of them and where they can and cannot be shared. I think that's always where sometimes we want to do good, and but we could trip over ourselves and maybe misuse a text or poorly treat a story. So I think those are all ways that we have to it's that nuance that we need to build, and it's a never-ending project. I don't know if that answers much, but thank you for the question. Other questions? Let's go to the gallery. Let's go to the opening before I bore you anymore. Thank you.